Hi there everybody, so we're going to look at ethics in this video. So ethics is a really big topic. Ethics is something which is used in everyday life really, but obviously when you are looking at this you'll need to be with the idea of IT in mind, although a number of the things within this will stem from things that you would do in everyday life anyway. So when we look at ethics, we're talking about things which you should do but are not necessarily required to do by law. Okay, so I've got a couple of examples there, like would you hold the door open for an elderly person, maybe for whatever reason? Would you format email properly? So that's actually something I'm going to come back to later on in the video when we talk about something called etiquette. Maybe you don't think anything of the way that you format emails, but actually you should be formatting your emails in a very specific way depending on who your target audience is, because if you don't, it's actually quite rude. So there's a number of different things to look at, and the factors that we're going to be covering are privacy, environmental, unequal access, online behavior, goes on to etiquette, globalization, freedom of speech with censorship, and acceptable use policies. We've also got codes of practice at the end of the video that we'll look at alongside them. And so there's a lot of stuff to consider there, okay? And I think something to bear in mind is, obviously I'll try to cover a few points, but a lot of this stuff that you're going to have personal experience with, so you may find some examples which maybe are closer to your own heart, I suppose. I'm not sure if that's a great phrase, but there'll be things that may have happened to you in your life, or maybe you've seen, or maybe you've read elsewhere, and that doesn't make them wrong. It just means that at this time I'm giving you an example, and obviously there are millions of examples of ethical issues out there. And like I said, some may not even involve IT. So this is where, when you put your searches into a website or into a book, if you're searching for it in a more traditional way, then you do need to just be mindful of the fact that if you just put ethics into a search engine of any type, and you'll get a plethora of different stuff. So an example of ethics that aren't in IT would be, let's say, if you get a delivery to your house of whatever it is, and you've not ordered it, do you A, keep it, or do you B, pass it on to the person who it's meant to be? Because ultimately you could come to the conclusion that the person who's meant to have it could just reorder it. Well, not reorder it, but they could get onto the delivery company and say, actually, it's not reached my house, and therefore they'll get it anyway. So that's an ethical kind of issue there when you think about it, and ultimately it's delivery company's fault that it's gone to the wrong address. So there's lots of different examples of ethics out there. Privacy. So we'll start off with privacy, and privacy obviously could look at a wide variety of different stuff. So in this specific kind of slide, I've got data. It could be though something like let's say if you're watching somebody log into a machine, how much are you looking at what they're doing, or are you looking at passwords that they're putting in, or what exactly are you doing? So there's a few things to kind of think about with privacy. The example that I've got here could be if you have shared your data with somebody. So it could be social media site, it could be a company somewhere like a college, maybe a delivery company that I mentioned previously. What are they going to do with this data? Are they just going to store it in their databases, which is probably what they should be doing, or are they going to try and make more money out of it? So we've got things such as methods of obtaining data, how data is stored and used, and you'll begin to get into things like the Data Protection Act quite quickly when it comes to that. but at the same time, there are some methods that companies use to try and trick people into giving their data away. And I've got an example there, which is Facebook. I believe it was the Cambridge Analytica story. It came out a few years ago now. And basically what you did, or what people did on Facebook, and I believe it will probably be similarly on other social media sites as well, is you'll be busy using Facebook and you'll get these things pop up and it'll be like, what animal are you? And you're like, oh yes, I'll try and find out what animal I am. And you click on this thing and it goes through a game, and eventually you find out, like, oh, you are a tiger or a lion or a panda or whatever. And you're like, oh yes, that's what animal I am. I will share that with my friends, and everybody will look at me and think, oh, I'm wonderful. And really what happens when people do that is it's kind of the front, because basically when you're clicking on that, you are giving that company who is running that sort of promotion permission to view all of your data. Okay, so if you were to do that, and then all of a sudden they can collect all of your data and then perform targeted whatever they need to do. So I've got an example here of people who did it quite well, which is the Trump and Brexit campaigns, specifically targeted certain people who they thought might be malleable to receiving that source of information. And indeed, Jeremy Corbyn used it, and the Labour Party used it a couple of years later, particularly well with university students. I'm not 100% sure that they did it exactly the same way. I think they just used adverts, but certainly the Trump and the Brexit campaigns used this type of technique to kind of mine information and find out, which people are going to be more likely to get these things appearing on their timeline, and then change their minds, but vote a certain way. Okay. Trump in particular has been, as you've all seen, particularly vociferous on social media. I believe I'll settle on that word, shall I? Now, I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that it happens. Okay, and he's gained a lot of support through that way. Okay, and a lot of people who will follow him will want to see news stories that he's bringing out. I mean, there's a phrase in there that ultimately, with things like social media, you end up you kind of see what you want. But the reason why you see what you want is because companies use these sorts of tactics to find out what you want to see, and then they just keep feeding you stuff that kind of reinforces the views that you already hold. So that's one way of doing it. And like I said, there are a number of different things that you can think about with privacy in terms of making sure that if somebody is looking at what you're doing, have you given them permission to do that? Have you given them anything like your passwords or anything? Because once you give people stuff, ultimately you're kind of losing your legal rights, and it becomes an ethical thing. You can't complain about somebody accessing your account if you've given them the login details. It's your own fault for giving it away, really. But again, it's kind of theory that just because you can do something, does that mean that you should do something? And obviously at the minute I'm recording this in the middle of a lockdown. There's nothing stopping me from going outside at the minute and doing something that I wanted to do. Not that I can actually think of anything, obviously, off the top of my head, but that doesn't mean that I will. Obviously, I'm recording this video, but it's by the by. I could do that if I wanted to. There's no police around, but does that mean that I will? No, because I want to try and ensure that this is the last time this happens. But we'll see. Anyway, I don't want to go down that route about lockdowns. Environmental issues. Okay, so this is an ethical thing, and you may be sitting looking at your laptop or phone or desktop thinking, how is this an environmental impact? But it is, and a number of specifications will ask you to consider environmental impact. And so even if you're kind of sitting there disagreeing with it, sometimes you need to be able to give them an answer, otherwise you're going to miss out on marks. Alright, and there are a number of different environmental impacts that you can have, and you have to think bigger than just the laptop or mobile device in your room. Okay, you have to think big about it. Think about these companies that require whole buildings full of servers in order to run. Okay, I visited the oh, I've had a mind blank. There's an IT company in Aylesbury, and it's a really, really big one, and I've had a complete mind break. It used to be Microsoft, but it isn't Microsoft anymore. Netscape or McAfee, I think it's one of those. Anyway, they have one of their 3 global offices in Aylesbury. The other ones are in China and America. I mean, can you imagine losing that trade-off? Anyway, I'm digressing. And they literally have a building full of servers. Okay, because obviously it's one of 3 in the world, so therefore if they're monitoring things like traffic, I believe it's McAfee, I'm pretty sure it's McAfee, then the A needs to be on all the time, B it needs to have the power to be able to cope with that. Alright, so then we're looking at some of these things beginning to kind of bear fruit. So things like noise, things like air and water pollution can be generated by IT systems. Again, I said you may be sitting there going, no it doesn't. But I guarantee you it does. You know, if you ever kind of put your hand over the fans, it obviously air that is coming out of it is not as healthy as the air that went into it, is it? Because it's collected dust, it's got all sorts in it. Now, I'm not saying that it's more unhealthy than anything like cars or anything like that. You know, not saying that. However, if it is picking up that stuff and it is worse than where it went in, and obviously, therefore, it's an environmental impact, isn't it? Resources, okay, so when you are creating large IT systems, you're going to need resources to make this stuff, aren't you? So a lot of computers made out of metal, plastics, all of that type of, and everything in between. You know, you've got wires in there. All of that is going to be needing resources to be able to be made. Now, I'm not going to lie to you guys. I am not a expert in raw materials, so exactly how much of that is biodegradable or renewable, I simply cannot answer that question. However, obviously we will need, because the quantity of machines that are an IT devices, you know, the number of them at the minute, we need to work out ways to reduce the impact on the environment. I've got glass, and obviously glass is renewable. You know, glass is made out of sand. You know, we can break it down and reuse it. But you know, things like some metals aren't recyclable, some plastics are not recyclable, and so on. We've got health hazards. Is an environmental impact. Okay, so you could have things like trailing cables. You could have things like RSI, so repetitive strain injury, which is where your joints get inflamed because they're constantly hammering away on keyboards all day. Eye strain, if you're looking at a screen all the time, particularly, and I don't know why people do this, but I know it seems to be quite a fun thing of students. If you're in a room, you have your screen, you turn all the other lights off. Okay, I said some students I know seem to do that. I've never been a fan of it myself, but that's not going to help your eyes in any way. And there are other kind of health hazards from that. You know, allegedly things like mobile phones have there used to be kind of stories going around that mobile phones gave people types of cancer. I've never seen any conclusive evidence of that. And of course, these days there's all these stories about 5G, which are nonsense. Is probably the most correct word that I can use for that. However, I'm sure that if you're talking about mobile networks of some kind, it's probably not going to do you masses of goodness getting over exposure to them. Okay. Waste, obviously, if you have so many devices, eventually some are going to be thrown away. What's going to happen with the old technology that is no longer needed? So it's if you have a device, it's usually made up of multiple different parts. So I think there are places that you can go and they will recycle the parts from them. But I would imagine that the bulk of people who have mobile devices will simply bin them. That's not statistically proven, that's just a guess on my part. So don't use that as any type of evidence, but or unless you can find some evidence on that. Unequal access to technology is a huge area which people could be potentially writing master's essays over. So, in fact, most of this stuff you can probably write master's essays over. You just need to be finding some points which ideally are backed up with some kind of evidence. All right, and again, you need to kind of just be mindful of the fact that you may agree or disagree with some of the things that you are writing down, but ultimately, if it's not written down, then there's no evidence that you know it. It's something just to bear in mind. So, unequal access to technology. Students with disabilities may not progress as expected. So, there's a few different things to think about with this. When we say things like unequal access to technology, you're commonly, or at least with me, the mind goes to developing countries, and you think about all of these places where they haven't got computers at all. But actually, as the recent pandemic and lockdowns have shown, there is a number of people in the UK who do not have the same access to technology as others, and therefore they're significantly disadvantaged in terms of a number of different ways. And so one of these, I put students with disabilities, however you can replace that ultimately, I imagine, with people with disabilities. So when I talk about that, there's a number of different things that we can think about with it. So first of all, there's a number of accessibility tools within pieces of hardware devices. All right. So if you are working on a desktop or a laptop, like I'm doing at the minute, you'll find things on there like a narrator. You'll find things on there like magnifier. You'll find things on there like high contrast. Okay. All of which will make it easier for you to do work. If you're trying to write something out by hand, you haven't got any of those. There's also things like spell checker, of course. Not that spell checker is always 100% accurate, especially when you have students who do not actually then read the word that's going in, and then all of a sudden they might have a word that's spelt right but makes no sense in the context of their sentence. You've also got more physical disabilities, right? So somebody, let's say, have mobility issues, right, is obviously going to be disadvantaged if they haven't got technology to help them do what they need to do. And you can think about a laptop, you can think about a desktop, but if you think about somebody who has quite severe mobility issues, so if you think about Stephen Hawking, he was ultra reliant on technology in order to be able to communicate with people. You've got IT specific skills. Make sure you're talking about IT specific skills, right? Because there are a number of subjects that actually you don't really need IT in order to learn, aren't there? If you're talking about something like health and social care, or if you're talking about something like law, right? These things have been taught for millennia, okay, but IT specific skills. So if you're talking about web development, programming, okay, those skills will not progress at the same rate, will they? Because if you haven't got access to that stuff, then you're going to struggle to do it, okay. And of course you can put other IT skills in there as well, but don't just go, oh, students won't be able to learn, because that's nonsense, okay. The planet is millions of years old, and humans have been around for thousands of years, and all of a sudden you're saying that because a computer that came out 20 years ago or 30 years ago, sorry, a bit more than that, by the by, and all of a sudden you're suggesting that they can't learn is just rubbish, okay. That doesn't mean that is not an extremely useful thing. Okay. Resources could take longer to source, right? So these days, if you want to find something, the most common thing that you do is go onto a search engine, which is typically Google, isn't it? However, there is an there is an over-reliance with that, and there is an over-reliance with people in general who just accept the first source that appears on their Google search, or maybe the second or the third search, and it will be like, oh yes, this must be correct. And then you look at who's written it, and it's some complete random from the other side of the world or wherever, and you've no idea whether or not they're qualified to be telling you the right thing. You don't know whether whatever they wrote the document for is correct. You don't know if they passed it or failed it or whatever it's for. And yet you still get students going, oh, that must be correct because you've come up on Google, therefore it must be right. Whereas actually if you get things like physical books, they're much more likely to be correct. Of course, there's a disadvantage with physical books, especially in IT, that they are quickly out of date, which is not a great thing, but certainly you all should be using more books, without question. Some people could struggle to complete tasks more efficiently. You think about the Office suite, and there's a reason why the Office suite is so popular, because it has so many different things within it that will automate processes. Okay, you think about spell check. You think about, if you're trying to write an essay in Word, okay, you've got, as I said, the spell check. You've got things like formatting tools. You've got things that insert images to it. You can use a template. You can insert a contents page. So many different things that if you were to do this by hand would take you a long time to do. So therefore that's got to be an advantage if you have it. But if you haven't got it, it's going to be a disadvantage. Needing to travel, okay, which could also have a cost impact, right? So, so we don't know how much it will cost, right? But if you're getting a bus somewhere, very few places allow you to get on a bus for free. So therefore, it would have a cost impact. Needing to travel obviously take time, especially if you are living reasonably far away from wherever you need to travel to, maybe a library somewhere. We've got their companies may be restricted with where and who they can sell to, right? So companies that obviously have free access to this is particularly the internet and the World Wide Web, will have access or will be able to sell to anywhere in the world in theory. Okay, obviously there are some countries that are more fussy about that. But if you don't have that type of access, or let's say, for example, you need to have your servers turned off overnight. If your website is stored on a server and you have to turn the server off, people can't access your website. So, all of that stuff could be an issue with that. Okay, so online behavior. All right, so actually, I'll be honest with you guys. I think this is something which is getting worse rather than better. So across technology, certain standards and types of behavior are expected, right? So you should be behaving and acting in a certain way, exactly the same as what you would do in the real world. Okay, so if you think about the real world, okay, there's a way you would act if you are at home. There's a way that you would act if you were with your friends. There's a way you would act if you were with teacher, if you're with your boss, etc., etc. And you may be sat there going, no, but Mike, I'm best friends with my boss. Okay, well, you might well be, and that's great if that's the case. But actually, generally, you would behave a certain formal way with somebody who is in authority to you in the real world, and this needs to be mirrored across the way that you behave online. That there are, for example, far too many students who talk to me seemingly exactly the same way that they'll talk to their friends, and that's just not appropriate. I don't know why students think that that's an appropriate thing to do. It's just common sense, really. You have to behave in certain ways. So we're online behavior, and obviously if I say to you about online behavior, well, you could talk about things like trolling, you could talk about things like cyberbullying, you could talk about things like how easy it is for somebody to go on to a site somewhere and say things which are frankly extremely harmful. And it's, like I said, it's a very, very easy thing to do. You know, if you're watching a YouTube video, you could be watching this video. Part of the reason why I turn the comments off is because there's no real reason for people to put comments on them. But you know, you might put something on there which you might not bat an eyelash at. You know, we've got words like cyberbullying on here. But if you go onto a website, if you go onto a YouTube video and go, "Oh, this is trash," well, actually, that's extremely insulting behaviour. You know, you might be thinking that it's not, or it's on YouTube and therefore I can use that sort of language. And a lot of people do. That doesn't make it right. Okay, it's extremely harmful. Okay, we can't beat around the bush there, and this thing can follow you around everywhere. You know, we've had students in the past who have put comments about tutors and colleges in the past. Not necessarily Milton Keynes College, but certainly other colleges, and you know, they're very easy to find. You know, and all it takes is another person to go look at this, and then all of a sudden, you know, if they've said something which is particularly harmful, we just, you know, we've had people withdrawn from courses previously for it. You know, you just can't do that sort of thing. It kind of follows you around, you know. And if you are applying for jobs, I can tell you from experience, because we've done it, or I've done it, that when sometimes you hire people, one of the things that you would do is go and search for things like social media profiles, so things like LinkedIn and Facebook and so on. And if what comes up is a load of foul and abusive language, you're not going to get the job, you know. And people just kind of, you've got to be very careful about this sort of thing and the way that you behave online. And if a question like this comes up, you have to be very careful about the way that you're answering it. Okay, so the way that I'm talking on this video is not the way that I would write this answer down. Okay, I'm just kind of trying to give you ideas of things that you could talk about when you come to do it. You know, when you come to talk about things like online behaviour and etiquette. So online behaviour is obviously the way that you behave, and etiquette is almost like the set of rules that you would adhere to with that. And you know, when we talk about an example of etiquette, could be when you write an email. Do you, or indeed a chat through Teams, would you write it the same way to, like I said, your line manager, your tutor, your friend, or your sibling? And they should be very different. You know, I get emails and chats from students, and they don't even begin with a high mic. They just kind of go, "What is this?" or something like that, and it's like, well, that's just rude, you know. Or you get text speak in the middle of an email. It's like, it's just rude. But and there are other examples. You know, obviously, if you're on things like discussion forums or social media, there are certain things that you should and shouldn't be doing. You've got to be very careful about the way that you behave online, because it will follow you. But also, generally, you know, if what you're saying is designed to hurt someone, then why are you putting it there? It doesn't need to be there. Kind of more of an example of, and this is a personal opinion, it's more an example of somebody's own insecurities than anything else, to be honest. All right, globalization. I appreciate I've currently been talking for 29 minutes, so I'm going to try not to, but ultimately we've got to cover all of this stuff. So, globalization is where a business has an impact on a global scale. So I put examples on there of businesses which are heavily reliant on IT. Okay, so you've got Amazon, Google, and Facebook. Do not think that there are not companies out there who were world famous before IT came around. So I can give you an example of Coca-Cola. Right, was famous around the world before the internet. So don't think this is something that is caused by IT. And when you're talking about globalization, obviously there's a lot of good stuff with globalization in terms of it can potentially drive prices down. It can give you more range of stuff to do. It gives you more range of products to buy. But in terms of things for you to kind of be thinking about, issues is primarily the thing that we're looking at. So we've got, does the market become unfair to other businesses? So the one that comes to, or in fact all three of those, maybe a lesser extent Facebook, are really kind of big leaders in their area, right? You look at Google. I mean, if you are a company who's looking to create your own search engine, I mean, Google has a real monopoly there, doesn't it? How is anybody going to get in there? How is it a good thing that there are not alternatives out there? Generally, competition is a good thing. I remember as a kid, and I mean, I appreciate this is a long time ago, but that Google wasn't actually in existence, and there were a range of different search engines out there. So one was called AltaVista. There was Bing's equivalent. Can't remember what it was called exactly. I don't think it was called Bing back then. There was Yahoo. So there was a range of different search engines. And generally, if you have more companies doing it, then you're going to drive up the quality of products. What if a business has a particular political affiliation? Something that technology sites are frequently accused of being is I can't think of a better phrase than liberal. I mean, it kind of makes sense, to be brutally honest, with the type of companies that they are. If you're a social media company like Facebook, you would expect it to be pretty liberal, really. I mean, it kind of makes sense, to be honest. But it's something that is kind of used almost as an insult these days. And I'm not going to go further down that route. But ultimately, if you kind of think about what they are, it shouldn't make a lot of surprise that they might lean towards a certain way because of the type of business that they're offering. Are prices fair so that smaller companies can compete? So got a couple of different things. So if you are somebody, a company selling a certain type of product, and the way that you produce it and manufacture it, and then you want to sell it, and the only way that you can kind of do that and still make it some money is, I don't know, for 20 quid. Okay, but what if, because of Amazon's buying power, they're able to do the same thing and sell it for 15 quid? Where are people going to buy it from? You'll be lucky if they buy it from you. By the way, I mean, Amazon don't make things. They're more of a conduit for selling stuff on it. Well, I say Amazon don't make stuff. Of course, they've got some goods out, but anyway, that's by the by. What we'll then be thinking about is, would you as a company have to cut your costs so much that you can't pay your employees fairly? It's something you need to kind of be thinking about with it, really. And the final point on there is something that's always happened. Okay, so will certain nations become more powerful over poorer ones because of this? Right now, so these three different organizations that I've got at the top here, so Amazon, Google, Facebook, obviously all American organizations, and they're massive companies, and they have influence across the world, right? So if Google or Facebook or Amazon come out and say something, it carries a lot of weight, and is that going to mean that America becomes more powerful because of that? Is interesting for. With all of this stuff, I mean, globalization again is a massive area. I can't really do it justice in a couple of minutes waffling about it on here. But there are lots of the questions that you might be asking, and just because I've not necessarily included them on these slides doesn't necessarily mean that they are wrong. You could have a discussion with your friends about them, but do be careful about putting a lot of real personal opinion there, okay? Because you might be saying Facebook is terrible because of this, but actually that is very much an opinion. What you'd be saying is Facebook runs the risk is a better phrase to use if you're writing it up. Freedom of speech, bit of a woolly topic, right? You always get these people that come in and go, well, I've got freedom of speech to say whatever I want. Well, you have, but actually the whole thing about whatever you want is not quite true, is it? Ultimately, if what you're saying is deteriorating into very abusive behaviour or incorrect facts, so I've got an example there of Donald Trump. This is obviously from just after the US election last year, where he was cited by Twitter. You've got to be very careful. And companies may look to censor your stuff or put warnings on it, like Twitter has done here. And it will just be, sometimes you just got to be kind of a bit careful about what you say. You've got to be careful about the way that you're managing things. If you're a company, if you're talking about the college, and a student walks through the college effing and blinding about something, the college would have the right to remove the student from the premises. Okay, and so you can't really say freedom of speech in that example, because actually what they would be doing is offensive or potentially offensive behaviour, or at best vulgar. So it is something to think about. Acceptable use. So I get a lot of students who are shocked, and they shouldn't be shocked, when I tell them that everything that they do in the college system is monitored. Everything. And of course they shouldn't be shocked, because it's exactly what the college needs to be doing. Primarily for student safety, but also in case a student is talking about things like drugs or guns or whatever. All right. So when I say that, it means every keyboard press. So every letter you press on the keyboard at college is monitored, and every search that you put into a search engine, every page that is loaded, everything that you do in Teams, okay, is monitored. And again, I've had students who have expressed shock that a quote-unquote private chat is not actually private. If you're not using college equipment anyway. I mean, it's just really bizarre that you'd think that wouldn't be the case. I'll be honest with you. And as I always kind of say to students, ultimately, if you want something to be private, don't put it on a college system. Pretty basic, really. So, acceptable use is where you have a system available to use, and you need to use it for the reason for which it is designed. All right. So all the college systems are designed for you to do college work on. They are not designed for you to have conversations on them expressing dissatisfaction necessarily about college or the tutor. Now, don't get me wrong. If you're just going, I disagree with what Mike has said, then you're not going to get torn up over that. But if you are being kind of really quite rude about it, then you probably expect that to happen. Also, if you think about me, okay, so if I'm using the college system, what I can't be doing is using the software that I have given to me by college to do personal stuff. So let's say I have access to the Adobe Suite, and it would be not acceptable for me to use the Adobe Suite for me to create a personal website on it. So again, common sense stuff, really. we've got some codes of practice here. So we've got a couple of slides on codes of practice. Because actually, if you think about code of practice is basically like a contract of what you should be doing when you are in a certain situation, which could be a job, it could be you guys have signed one as a student. It's what the enrollment form had on it at the beginning of the year. So it's going to be certain things about how you should behave, and it may include many of the things that we've previously mentioned. Okay, so what purpose of this is, it kind of really sets out boundaries about what is expected from people, and obviously there are a number of different kind of impacts from that. So we start off with the company itself, and this is not an infinite list. Okay, you might be sitting there thinking about something else which might be an impact of it, and that's absolutely fine. So we've got companies. So you want mechanisms to allow whistleblowing. What whistleblowing is, and you need to make sure that you are using official, proper terms. Okay, is to allow if somebody within your company sees another person within your company doing something that they shouldn't be doing, they have a mechanism to report it. Okay, so I do not want to hear anything along the lines of grassing or anything like that, because actually you kind of need to get your head around the fact that you need to, and actually it's a thing required by law these days. You need a mechanism to allow that. You know, what you don't want is one member of your company to report something and then it be broadcast around everybody else, so you know they all know that one member of the company has reported another person. You know, it's ridiculous, really. So you know you need to just bear that in mind. Think about who's going to monitor the code of practice. They're probably not going to be very popular. You know, who's going to enforce it? Probably a line manager. Could be HR. You know, so who monitors it and who enforces it are two different things. So if you think about your college course, right? So in terms of your tutors, obviously Jules and myself are more monitors. Okay, Dan does monitor a bit, but he also has more power to enforce. But overall, the head honcho is Louise, isn't it? You know, and she will really kind of enforce, you know, things if they're not running as well as best. Excuse me. What are the outcomes of breaches, right? So if somebody breaks a code of practice, what is going to be the outcome of that? A lot of it will depend on what's happening. You know, if you think about the way that you use college systems, if you are searching, you know, I'm not going to spell it out for you, but I'm sure that you can imagine if you are, for example, searching certain materials, then you're going to get a stiffer punishment than maybe if you are just, I don't know, playing Minesweeper. You know, and you should be playing Minesweeper, but you know, if you are playing Minesweeper versus if you are doing something, you know, really quite bad, you know, you can imagine that there will be differences in outcomes there. And you know, obviously that will vary. Impact on working patterns. Okay, so is your code of conduct going to be so strict that you don't allow your employees any sort of creativity or freedom? Because that could potentially mean that their productivity is lower, which is not obviously what you want. But you may have kind of more, I can't think of the exact phrase, you might know that they are doing certain things all the time, but they don't have the freedom to try out new things, and that might mean that they don't improve or get quicker or whatever you want them to do. And obviously, is there a cost to implement it? You know, in terms of if you're monitoring it, how are you going to do that? Are you going to hire somebody to monitor and enforce it? You know, something just to bear in mind, really. And the final slide, okay, so in terms of you as members of staff, okay, how is the code of practice going to impact you? So you might well feel that Big Brother is watching you. So when I said to you guys about acceptable use to every time you hit a key on the keyboard, it's being monitored, you might well think, oh, that's Big Brother. Well, maybe not Big Brother is the right phrase, but, similar to it. I mean, obviously college has a duty of care over students. I mean, guys, we have several thousand students, so they're not going to be looking at you if you're doing a piece of writing excuse me, a piece of writing on databases. Nobody is going to be watching you. However, if you are typing up things maybe relating to self-harm, then there will be certain keywords that will be triggered, and you will get an alert, and we'll need to deal with it. Okay. But obviously in other in other settings, you could have actual people physically watching you, which could be interesting. I remember when I used to do, this is a long time ago again, when I used to work for River Island in a warehouse. This was pretty much when I just left school, and I had to scan certain amounts of clothes to be shipped to other stores, and I would be kind of monitored for my productivity levels and whether or not I was doing what I was being told to do. And I spoke about productivity levels there. I mentioned it in the previous slide again, but if you are so restrained by these codes of practice about the things that you could do, could it mean that your productivity levels drop? Happiness. I can say after many years that if you are constantly having people watch you and restraining you from having a little bit of freedom about what you're doing, it is not actually very pleasant. It can be quite demeaning. It can be quite demoralizing. So it's something which could be an issue. Okay, I mean, maybe some of you guys are watching it thinking, actually, I wouldn't have any problem with that. But, there are people out there that genuinely, would have issues with people watching them all the time. And then, if you step out, let's say, for example, you put hair out of line, right? Because people break the rules more often. I say more often than not, but I don't mean that. I mean, but people, it's very rare that you get somebody who has gone through all of their life and not broken rules at some point, right? So if we were flung in jail for every time that we broke a rule, there'd probably be none of us out there at the minute. So if you kind of put hair out of line, what you want is a little bit of flexibility. So let's say, for example, I was in the River Island warehouse, and I put something in the wrong place. I mean, it's 20 years ago now, so I don't know what systems they would have there now. But let's say I sent it to the wrong store. Then what you'd want is somebody to come up to you and say, okay, you've sent it to the wrong store. Appreciate this could be accidental, but please kind of watch what you do in the future. Or maybe if you are working for, because I know some of my students work for McDonald's. Let's say, for example, you serve somebody a Diet Coke rather than an ordinary Coke. Coke costs pence to make. So what you wouldn't want is your line manager raging at you because you made an easy mistake to make. It would be a case of, please watch what you're doing. Don't do it again. Obviously, if you do it 50 more times, there'd be an issue. Consistency of treatment, or a perception of consistency of treatment, because ultimately, a lot of when you see person A performing a certain action and you see person B performing a certain action, and then you perceive one person to get more favourable treatment than the other, then that's something that's going to make you quite unhappy. So what you want is both of those people to be treated the same, assuming that they've done exactly the same thing. However, commonly there are reasons as to why certain treatment might be different. And you may not be fully aware of them. So sometimes you do just have to kind of roll with it, really. There's lots of different, and you may be, again, you may have other ideas for this, and that's absolutely fine, because you may have different experiences to me. Okay, so we've come to the end of this presentation. It is going into its 50th minute now. So the idea is that there's stuff there that you can look at, make notes on, revise it, come back to again later on if you need to. I hope it's been useful. I appreciate that enjoyment is probably not necessarily the right word for this, but I do hope it is useful for you going forward long term, and I will obviously be looking to make further kind of videos as we go through, because ultimately one of the nice things with videos is that you obviously have the stuff on the screen, but you also have the narration over the top, which means you get two lots of input rather than one if I was just to give you the PowerPoint slides. So again, just before I sign off, hope it's been useful, and I look forward to seeing you soon.